call, but also to all the folks who will hopefully watch this afterward. My name is Chike Agu. I'm a commissioner here at MHEC. I also serve as the vice chair and also chair of the Education Policy Committee. We are restarting this committee after a number of years as one of the two standing committees of MHEC. And very bluntly, it's meant to deal with, frankly, all the things that are not money, infrastructure, things like that, really that deal with the substance of what students are learning around the state in our higher education institutions. And one of the reasons that we wanted to restart this is one, we think these types of institutions and committees are good. But secondly, historically, this committee has taken a lot of incoming, whether it be academic review, whether it be a bunch of other kind of hot button issues. But we believe this committee also has a role to serve in terms of being proactive, in terms of actually setting, helping us up forward a plan for higher education for the students and for the state. And so, for particularly the next probably few months, you're going to potentially see this committee look different than in the past. We're going to be talking about really looking forward. What is the plan for the state? What are our goals that we want students to complete? You'll hear about our new completion goals that we are drafting right now, and you'll hear a little bit of feedback from us on that. You will hear about the update of the state higher education plan, and I want to be clear, we see those two things going together. We see the goals as telling us where we're going to go. We see the plan as telling us how we're going to get there. And then lastly, let me just say just two thank yous. One, to Dr. Dow, who's on here, who's our head of academic affairs, and her intrepid team, small but mighty. And they work tremendously hard. And when we give them new work, they don't always get new people. So we really want to thank them for their efforts in supporting us. And secondly, I want to thank my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, Commissioner Serrano, Commissioner Dukes, who will hopefully join us. We are volunteers. All of them have demanding day jobs and have made additional time to be part of this. And so I thank them very greatly for making additional time on a regular basis to be part of this committee and part of this work. So what I want to do just very, very quickly is, and Dr. Dow, if you're able to, I just want to give a quick overview of exactly what the purpose of this committee is, and we'll kind of put up our bylaws so we situate ourselves, and I think our lawyer friends will appreciate that. And then again, zoom out and just say kind of what we are here to do, and then hopefully we can dive into the substance today. So Dr. Dow, if you're able to share that, that would be fantastic. So, and at some point I'll ask you to scroll, but if you were to look at the bylaws of MHEC, the number one clause in terms of our responsibilities is to create and implement the state plan for higher education. That is actually our number one priority. That is important, and at least under this commission, and I know I speak for Chair Motz as well, that is going to be number one. That's the thing that we can most do to influence how students are learning and faring within the state in relation to higher education, and we're going to keep that front and center. But you'll also hear about, if you look at clause 2 around desegregation, equal opportunity, reviewing academic programs, which we spend a lot of time on as a commission, and we will put in on as a committee if appropriate. In terms of the administration of a number of the commission's educational programs and initiatives, research, and just very frankly, anything that we can't foresee that affects the education of students here in Maryland. That is going to come before this committee. Generally, this committee does not make choices by itself. We generally are going to make recommendations to the broader commission. The broader commission will vote, but in many ways, we're that first line of defense and triage. But that is the purpose of this committee. Our counterparts, the finance committee, have their own charge, but this is what we're going to be doing here. But I wanted to show this because that's why we are starting and putting that state higher education plan front and center. If there are any questions or thoughts, happy to take any, but I think it's something that probably all the commissioners on the call are fairly familiar with. I just wanted to frame that. What I wanted to do next was pivot back to Dr. Dow. And so what I wanted to do was, while we are being proactive, we actually do have a little bit of incoming. Our state legislature this past session in regards to state higher ed was busy, and in many ways gave us very clear timelines for things that they want to see from us. And what's actually great is many of these things were things that this commission, in concert with many of our state agency colleagues, were already doing. But now we have some specific deadlines that this committee is going to make sure that we reach. So Dr. Dow, I'm going to throw it back to you so you can walk through that timeline of deliverables. And again, this is a chance particularly for commissioners to ask questions, because I will say they're a little piecemeal. Some things are due someplace, some bigger things are due in another timeline. And so I want you all to be clear on what our timelines are. So feel free to take the time to ask questions on what exactly does this deliverable mean versus that deliverable. So Dr. Dow, let me throw it to you and go from there.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Agu, and good morning, everyone. As was circulated is a kind of outline of upcoming deadlines that we are expected to meet to the legislature regarding state plan updates. The first update is this upcoming January 1st, where the agency, the commission, is expected to create and develop an appendix that identifies state and regional workforce needs and emerging needs. And we are to do that in collaboration with Commerce, Labor, and other community partners. This appendix, and they clarify it is an appendix to the state plan. It is supposed to be updated annually. So this will be the first of an annual iteration. For this first iteration, we are expected to send a draft of it to the Legislative Policy Committee for review and comment before formal adoption. So we staff are working on this. We've had a number of conversations with Commerce and Labor about existing lists of emerging and in-demand occupations and industries. Labor and our agency so I think we're both trying to work through recruitment right now and try to figure out how to hire as quickly as possible. So that's the first kind of milestone that we are expected to meet. The next milestone is January 1st, 2026. It's a rinse and repeat. It's an update to that appendix. The third milestone is July 1, 2026. The legislature has said they would like to have a quadrennial review. The agency is expected every 4 years to review the state plan. And so the next review would be expected by July 1, 2026. You'll see, though, there is a distinction between periodically updating the state plan and providing a review of the state plan. We can update the state plan, at any point in time. You could update it every year. You could update it every 6 years. But we are expected to do a review of the state plan to evaluate where we are, where do we need to go. That needs to be done every 6 years. And so the next review is expected January 1st, 2026, or I'm so sorry, July 1, 2026. And then you'll see the third appendix, January 1, 2027. So those are broad deadlines expected by the legislature when it comes to state plan. Commissioner Agu, I'll turn it back over to you.
And let me make one not clarifying point, but kind of a macro point, and then I'll ask one just specific. I'll ask one specific question to clarify. So beyond the fact that it's always good to have a plan, I like to use the Yogi Berra quote: "If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else." But I think that's broadly true here. One of the reasons that the state plan is such a powerful tool is, in many ways, it is the rules-based and bureaucratic box in which many of our higher education institutions operate. When they make their budgets, they have to make justifications based on the higher education plan. I wrote in X item because it fits X part of the state higher ed plan, and so that's why we think this is an important box. This is an important tool. Secondly, these are deadlines, meaning we can do things before that. So as we think about, for example, 2025, I will say I will push not to wait till 2026 to give our full state plan. I actually think that we need to be doing stakeholder outreach drafts, and I actually think that 2025 is going to be a propitious time to have a state plan. Number one, as we think about budget season that's going to be coming up, as we think about obviously some of the initiatives that the governor has announced, I think this is a time to make sure that Maryland higher ed is moving in a path with a lot of the other things that we have happening within the state. So I do want to be clear, and Dr. Dow will correct me. We could present a new higher ed plan July 1, 2025. And to be honest, that's parts of the deadline that I have in my head that I think we can make a difference to in terms of crafting this. Let me stop there, though, and turn back to my commissioners, because I think this is the first time we've walked through this as a group. Are there any questions about those deliverables, those timelines? All right. You are exceedingly clear, Dr. Dow. So with that, let me move to this is we're on number 4. Let's talk about post 2025 goals. So, Dr. Dow, what I'm going to have you do is just dive in there, talk about what those goals have been, talk about, and then we'll go into kind of what we are anticipating that they're going to partially be. And the one thing I do want to make clear is, in the past, if you were to look at the history of this, the goal creation process and the plan process have actually not gone together. In fact, if you were to look at our prior goals and look at our plans, they don't, I don't want to say they don't quite match, but they're not quite aligned. Let me say it like that. I think we want to remedy that here. Again, we want the goals, we want the plans to flow from the goals. The goals are where we're going. The plan is going to be how. So it's why we want to keep these processes together. The other thing I'll say is the goal process, excuse me, is not just us. We are working directly with the Department of Labor on this. We're working with the Department of Commerce, Governor's Workforce Board, because we are not the only stakeholders here. So, Dr. Dell, let me throw it to you to talk about the completion goal, where they stand currently, which commissions have heard before, but it'll be a helpful recap for anyone else who's watching. And then also, where do we think they're going, which is, I think, where we've had less discussion recently. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. And again, I am having some tech difficulties. My computer just, I think, does not have quite the right amount of memory. If I freeze, I can tell when I freeze, so I'll just hold and I can tell when I come back, and I'll just come back. So bear with me on those tech issues. Commissioner Agu, you're on mute.
Dr. Dell, also, if you ever need me to share on your behalf, let me know. And there is a call-in option as well if you would need to just call in, and I can scroll through it. Just let me know.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So as I think you all are familiar with at this point, our current goal is that by 2025, 55% of Marylanders will have at least an associate's degree. We provide an annual report on where we are towards this degree every year. If you look at our most recent report, you can see we're on track to meet that goal, but we are likely not going to meet that goal. There's a number of reasons for this. This is what we would consider a population goal. So this is not just about our colleges producing migration, how individuals come and leave the state of Maryland. And it also is a reflection of associate's degree or higher. If we look at Lumina Foundation data, they provide national statistics for every state. They include certificates and certifications in their metrics. And if we look at the Lumina data, we're actually past that 55% when we include certificates and certifications. We're at 58.4%. So considering those very important and big contributors to our state goal, now is the time to start thinking about post-2025 goals. Based on the survey and the conversations that we've had with a number of stakeholders, it seems like there's interest in expanding our one goal into 3 specific goals. One is we would maintain an attainment goal that would include meaningful credentials. And we have evidence from other states that they've already picked up on this. We've got Kentucky, Michigan, there are many others. Just as I showed you, Lumina sees value in certificates and certifications. So thinking through what is a meaningful credential, what are meaningful outcomes, that's all part of this. So that would be one goal that this group, the Education Policy Committee, could think about. A second goal is a completion goal. So this would be focused on our institutions, and a completion goal that targets equity to say, regardless of different demographics, you are completing students. Students are finishing their programs of study at the same rates. They are taking the same amount of time to do that work. And again, we have other states doing similar completion goals. Texas has a goal that 500,000 students will complete post-secondary credentials of value each year. North Carolina to produce 2 million degrees or industry value credentials by 2030. And there are other states that incorporate equity into that completion goal. Massachusetts has very specific goals around Latinx and African American students. Colorado, Hispanic populations, African American populations, and the Native American population. So thinking about completion and equity in kind of the same breath. And third, a goal that focuses on research, and in particular, research products. Texas is really the only state, based on our research on this front, that has a statewide research. They've operationalized that by talking about dollars in private and federal research and development expenditures, and then as well as how many doctoral students or doctoral graduates they're producing. In Maryland, again, based on the survey and the conversations that we have had, it seems like there's more of an interest to focus on research products, things like patents, incubators, private-public commercialization projects. So that's where we are thinking about 3 specific goals in the post-2025 era. I won't go into timeline because I think I'll stop there and send it back to you, Commissioner Agu.
Let me make one comment, and then I really want to throw it open to my commissioners, to my fellow commissioners. So we are in draft right now. This is very much being produced by HCM Strategies, which is a firm that MHEC is working with, and this is being produced in real time with those other agencies, and also beginning to get stakeholder outreach from the higher education community, from the business community, from associated kind of nonprofit organizations, and other folks we know have a deep stake here. And we're going to kind of stay on that track with them. And we are one of those stakeholders that I argued we should be one of those first stakeholders because of the particular place in which we sit. One of the things that folks will know about this great group is not only are they great volunteers, but each of them brings very specific expertise to this work. And so if you look at these goals, I have deep interest in what Commissioner Williams thinks on the research and development side of this. Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, from your work nationally, you work on credentials of economic value. Commissioner Serrano, we'll come back to him when he rejoins us, obviously on the equity goals, but and obviously Dr. Dukes across all of these. But what I want to do is throw it open to you all. And Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, I'm a teacher, so I'm going to call on you first. I'm curious about your thoughts around all of this. And this is a plan. This is not baked. And so in terms of either, hey, here are things that we need to think about, or here are things that give me pause, or things that I'm very much in favor of, would love to start with you. And we'd love to think about this first goal. And if you could think about kind of credentials of economic value, that first one. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because we want to relate this to HCM, and we want to get this part of the process as we craft these goals.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and to chat about all of this. I think my initial reaction was, how much do we see our work as taking where we are and going one step further versus stepping back and potentially thinking new about what matters most and how we measure it. And I say that because I think from the first approach of let's start where we are and go one step further, saying, hey, we've defined attainment in this way. Now let's add credentials in, and let's just, go through the work of how other people think about credentials, Kentucky, Michigan, Lumina, and we're done. If we go the second path, there's some metrics that I've been following as they become more standardized and the research is out there that I think we have an opportunity as a state to take a lead in, both transparently setting goals and reporting on metrics like ROI at an institution level and rolled up at a state level that looks at the completion rate, the impact for completers in terms of wages 10 years post-completion, and the cost per completer and enrollee. And I'll actually put in chat now, as someone who has been desperate for this data, one of the best comprehensive data sources I've seen that just came out about 2 weeks ago. And we can filter by Maryland and see every institution and program in Maryland where we are on those metrics. Another flavor of that is a wage gain metric that looks at the number of folks who are enrolled, their likelihood of completing, and then again, the differential impact. And then still, a third set, which is kind of going to your third bucket around living wage, folks above the living wage, measuring economic mobility, and lastly, labor market data in terms of employer time to hire, openings, unemployment rate, et cetera. And so I say all that because I think if we say, and I've been learning a lot on this journey, that we know that we're going to kind of take where we are and go a step further. I think we should absolutely dive in on the attainment credential question, and I'm happy to share my thoughts there. But I wonder if that is premature if we are really open to putting in some new, potentially cutting edge and more comprehensive metrics into the plan.
Let me say one thought on your macro question, which is the answer is, my answer is actually three, which is basically, number two is actually what we want to do. I've thought about many of the types of data that you're talking about. I think there are ways to fit it. I think there are ways to fit all that data within these certain buckets. I think the buckets generally have consensus. I think how we measure and define those buckets, I think actually we have we should push as hard as we can. The only thing I think I'll say, this is where the plan is going to come in. The question will be, how do we get to there from where we are? And I think that will be the planning process, which is, if there's data we don't have, how do we get that data, so on and so forth. So I think the answer is we want to push as hard as possible. I think on the rigor side, what we will have to do is, I think we've all seen plans that were great in theory, but there was no clear path from where we are to how to get to that plan. And I think that's where we want to make sure that we fill in the gap. When I hear everything that you say, the thing that I just thought about is, I think you are basically, to me, putting a lot of rigor on the word meaningful. What does meaningful actually mean? And to me, it's, what does it actually mean for someone out in the economy, out in the market, which I think is to me where we should be. And I think one thing that I want to avoid is, I was thinking about credentials of meaning. It's one thing to say cybersecurity credentials are meaningful because the economy needs it. They're good in theory. I think we'd like to go a step or two further, which is not just as a cybersecurity, and I'm just using that because we're in Maryland, meaningful, but this particular cybersecurity credential from this institution has produced these outcomes. Therefore, we define it as meaningful, because as we know, there's a bell curve even in terms of the same credential from different types of institutions in terms of what it gets people. So I think we want to be clear about that, and I actually think all the data that you talk about should be fits here pretty meaningful. And I just grouped it in terms of this is what meaningful means, but I think we should think as broadly as possible. And to be honest, we have that license. And again, this is why we're in this process now, way before January 1st and way before 2025, so that we can do that. So that was a long rejoinder to your question, but it's a yes. And I think it'll be on this committee to figure out how do we map the steps 1, 2, 3 from where we are to where we want to go.
Yeah, great. That all sounds great. And I think knowing hey, we're going to stick largely with the buckets we have, but we have latitude within them makes sense. I think the only thing I'd say then, where we found in my own work a lot of the not tension, but the choice to make is, do we try to do something that is really accurate, that is like pushing the frontier, but necessarily complex? Or do we build on the learning that has been done by others and the work that has been done? And I would say my personal bias when it comes to how we define credential attainment, I would go for the best option of the other definitions that other folks have come up with, just because it gets to create our own in this case, I think would get overly complex. So I would want to look at Kentucky, Michigan, Lumina, the committee on the chairwoman for House and Education Workforce Committee have actually done some language on how they're thinking about short-term programs that are above a bar. So I just think that will save us a lot of time. And in my experience, if we go the other route of like, we're going to have our bespoke definition, we will end up with a level of complexity that makes it hard to rally the troops behind the goal.
I personally agree with that. And I also, more understandable, the better, because the other thing we have to think about, and I'm looking at Commissioner Williams because you talk a lot about this, is once a plan is made, we have to track our progress. And we have to track our progress in a way that is understandable, not just to us, but also to the broad array of stakeholders, from businesses to students themselves. The more complex it is, the harder it is, I think, to be understandable to a broader array of stakeholders. So I think your plan is, I think I agree, but I am not the only person here. Anything else you want to say either on goal one or more broadly? Because I would love to go to Commissioner Williams next to hear your thoughts, particularly on goal three, but also more broadly.
Just that I think it'd be really exciting for one goal, sub goal somewhere to take cost into account. It's something that is rarely done in our space. And I think there's no real calculation of ROI, and as a funding body, to have an eye towards the costs and what the costs are generating would be one of my strong preferences.
Commissioner Williams.
Thanks so much. Great discussion so far, and I agree with so much of what you both have already said. Just a couple of high-level points and maybe a few more specific points. So I do think that the three goals, or in that general direction, makes sense. There's so much more evolution that I think we're considering here than in the past, and it seems appropriate to where we're headed as an economy, and the intersection of higher education and economic growth, particularly in our state. The reality is, broadening the attainment goal to new certificates, I think it makes a lot of sense. We can do both of those levels, our current level, but also broaden that. And with the way hiring forces are and student progression and the economy, I think that is reasonable for us to consider. Thanks again for including goal 3. I know this is initial discussion. We have a lot of stakeholder input we have to take into account over the next year. So, I don't want to stick to my convictions too firmly, because there's a lot of back and forth around how do we capture broadly the role of innovation and economic growth in our higher education powerhouse, particularly in our state. And I think that's the directional emphasis of goal 3. And in this initial conversation, I'm cognizant of the fact of being directional and not being falsely precise. And I think some of your comments, Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, were around that point, around certain metrics that we don't want to be over-engineering or precisely false in each of these points, and make it so complex coming from a previous plan to the next plan that there are so many metrics and so many measurements that we're creating de novo. So I'm grateful for the research that we already have so far with national landscape data. I think we should really be, from whatever we do over the next 6 months and a year, be very cognizant about best practices in other states, best measurement tools, and sort of cutting edge changes that we can consider as we think about these 3 directional points. But I think particularly on goal 1, we're heading in the right direction. Grateful for goal 2, a very appropriate, everything we've discussed and the emphasis that we're headed. Goal 3 is, I think, going to require a very broad discussion with business, higher ed, economic development, commerce, labor, and others around how we can capture that appropriately and not over-engineer it. And I think that's really important as we go in these directions, that this is a big change from our previous plan to what we're considering. And so we don't want to bite off more than we can handle in one iteration of a plan evolution.
Let me ask a question to you, and then partially because of your day job. When I've seen metrics around how do we capture how higher ed affects the innovation and the economic growth ecosystem, the default is we're going to track patents. Not a bad metric, but we know it doesn't track everything. Then some people track research dollars. Maryland has always done well there, particularly due to some of your work. But I think if you look at the literature, most folks will say that it's necessary but insufficient to fully capture the effect that higher ed has on an economy, purely from an innovation perspective. I am curious, from where you sit, if there are things that you've seen where you're like, these metrics or these artifacts get closer to that. And again, I'm at the beginning of my journey here, but I'm curious if there are things that you see like, we have to look at this, or we have to go see what they're doing, even if it's from abroad. I would be curious to see if there are metrics that you are saying, hey, we really need to look at the same way that Commissioner Tabor-Stalen is thinking about for, I think, goal 1.
That's a great question, great points. There are some And I think we'll probably want to deal with some of those in a deeper discussion in our next meeting, in the interest of time and just laying out this direction. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that we have, the things that you've mentioned, which may be appropriate, but I think that they're incomplete because we also have, broad representation of the higher ed community with community colleges and liberal arts universities that also contribute to innovation. And so I think it's important for us to not just say it's, the R1 institution. Of course, it's the R1 institutions that do a lot of these things, but there's a broad ecosystem that contributes to innovation and economic growth and broadly commercial opportunities. And whether that's the creation of talent or tracking how that talent leads to new businesses, how we retain particularly businesses in Maryland that come out of efforts across the higher education spectrum here. So I'm sensitive to the fact that, yes, what we've laid out so far, it may be approximating some interesting areas. It's way too early for us to, think about these are the exact metrics. And there's a broader higher ed community that contributes to those in different ways that are maybe not as specific to, patents, startups, and all the things we talk about, research dollars, but very important either qualitatively or quantitatively to that ecosystem. So I really think that is going to be an important broad stakeholder conversation so that we don't just emphasize it in one direction of the higher ed community.
So let me put more bluntly what I think I heard you say. Look, if you were to look at just purely research, University of Maryland and Hopkins drive. I think I've seen the figure. I think something like 60 to 2/3, 60% to 2/3 of that in the state of Maryland, obviously because of their historic strength there. I think what I hear you saying is, in some ways, this third bucket is misnamed. In that you would say, yes, research has a huge impact on the innovation and economic growth ecosystem, but what you actually want to measure is what is the economic impact of higher education as we want to see in the state. Yes, research is going to be a part of that, but there are these other things that are also part of that, like entrepreneur. I think about Prince George's Community College, which has an incubator on campus, which is actually turning out businesses and helping train entrepreneurs in the space. I think about obviously any number of institutions who are training critical workforce, cyber, parts of allied health, so on and so forth. So what I hear you saying is, in some ways, you want to really have this goal be around economic impact versus purely research products. I'm not saying pro or con, but that's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, I think that is an open question, but directionally, we need to think most broadly about how our higher education community is an engine for economic growth in Maryland and beyond. And in order to do that, we need to be very inclusive to all the parties that contribute to that economic growth. Yes, there are all those R1 pieces that are this essential, right? And a key strength, but there's so much other opportunity, partnerships that we may not be aware of fully and measuring appropriately once we do that scan. So I'll just put a plug in it for now, but I think on goal 3, we have a lot more work to do to be broadly thinking about economic impact, and there's some sub pieces to that.
So this is super helpful, and again, as we are at the beginning here, and I will definitely tell commissioners, definitely at the beginning, as I've said many times, Commissioner Williams could be a diplomat as well as an economic developer. He picks his language carefully, but I think here this makes sense, and I also think one thing I'm seeing in these processes is I actually think, I don't say putting stakes in the ground, but I think getting clear quickly is going to, I think, in some ways be important for us. Because I think when I think about 2025, and I think some of the things that we're thinking about, whether it be from Commissioner Tabor-Stale, and you've seen the move toward this across the country. I know I have from my time at the federal level, from the economic development point of view. Commissioner Williams, you have heard this directly from the governor. He has high expectations of what he wants to do in this space. And then definitely in the middle. And my hope is, well, what we may do is actually hop to some other items, and hopefully by the time Commissioner Serrano is able to come back with us, we can talk about kind of that middle equity goal, because I know he has particular thoughts there. But this is I think, very much the beginning of this conversation. I see our good friend, our good friend Brett Phillips. He's thinking, and I can see the gears in his mind moving as he hears us speaking. But I think the point on being inclusive institutions, and by the way, Commissioner Williams, not just inclusive of institutions, but inclusive of geographies, because in the end, this could very much stay an I-95 conversation, which I love I-95, spent a lot of time on it, but that's not the whole state. And we want to make sure that the shore in Western Maryland is very much represented here. One, because they're critical to parts of the economy, as well as it's just the right thing to do. From Commissioner Tabor-Stalen or Commissioner Williams, anything else before we hop a little bit to, I believe, is going to be agenda item 6, which is more kind of the future and what it looks like. And my hope is by the time we get through that, we'll have Commissioner Serrano back to us, and we'll hop back to this discussion. Anything else you all wanted to add before we kind of move on to what things will look like next?
The only thing I wanted to add, and this is potentially my bad, I have not fully gone back to everything the governor has said on this and how he and his team are thinking about their overarching vision and goals. And so I remember there was some great reading early in joining MHEC, but I was having trouble pulling it up. But I think as we think about this, anything we can do to stay aligned with his office would be great.
Absolutely. And I'll say before I go to Dr. Dow, one of the things that Secretary Rise made very clear to us is the governor, he picked you all for a reason, in that he's made very clear what his values are and the direction he wants to go. But in particular policy areas, he has left, I don't say left the step 1, step 2, step 3 to us, because you all have amazing expertise. So I think to what you said, I think directionally correct. I think he's looking particularly to the brilliance on this call to help us figure out exactly how. And so I expect as part of this process, one of our stakeholders will be the governor's office. They will want to hear our progress because they know how important Maryland higher ed is to so many of the goals that you mentioned. Dr. Dow.
If I may, I would just want to add on that front. Certainly, the Moore Miller State Plan is now our guiding star. That was released in January. I'm happy to throw the link in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. We are now regularly meeting with the governor's office around strategic planning for implementing the Moore Miller Plan. What are the initiatives that our agency is already taking on to align with the Moore Miller Plan? So 2 things that I want to highlight. One is there's clearly a section on setting up, Leave No One Behind by setting up Maryland students for success. Has to do with education initiatives, very broad umbrella. And then there's a section on more jobs for Marylanders. So MHEC has been in conversations for those 2 priorities. A theme throughout it is a focus on STEM. Both STEM education as well as STEM industries, and thinking through that. So I want to just that out loud for you all to acknowledge.
If I remember correctly, I think that's goals 2 and 4, if I remember correctly, in the Moore Miller Plan, and they have I know you all have met with the Chief Performance Officer, Asma, who is tracking this diligently across all 10 of the goals that are within the plan. So as we talk about kind of timeline and expectations, let me just talk about what this is going to look like. So this is going to be a little bit of a 2-step, which is and that we'll be on one step, that we'll go back to the other and can go back and forth. In some ways, it'll be hard to create the full plan until we have the full goals. And so basically what we expect, and Dr. Dow, keep me honest, we expect to have full draft goals by probably Labor Day-ish, if I remember correctly. That will be going to be fully shared with stakeholders, correct? I see a slow nod, which I think is the internet.
Yes, that is. Just to expand on that a little bit, so you'll see in the document, the summer months, reviewing relevant data, coming up with the kind of the metrics, and not necessarily the specific metrics, but are we going to say 60% by 2030. What are we going to say about equity, right? Having just a bit more specificity. If we treat these goals like SMART goals, having those specific, attainable, time-bound metrics, having a draft of that in collaboration with this committee and other community partners by the end of August. And ideally at the August commission meeting, presenting it to the full commission for feedback, consideration, then pushing those big goals out back to the community in September, October, the October commission meeting, reviewing community feedback and revising accordingly, with kind of two big goals, two big time points in mind. As you've heard in commission meetings, we're going to do a student success summit November 14th and 15th, using that as a place to formally announce the post 2025 goals as the key indicator. The reason for that is thinking through, giving us enough time if there's interest or a need to make legislative changes. Our current 55% goal is, and so thinking through any legislative sessions, any legislative changes for the 2025 session in light of these discussions that are going to happen over the next several months. So backing out from that, that is what we're looking like.
Dr. Dow, let me just clarify. The current 55% goal is actually in statute, correct?
Correct.
That's what I thought. So again, this is the bit of the two-step, which is the getting really clear on the goals and making sure that the North Star is correct, which is where I think this committee is going to be critical. And then, of course, I think we're going to be critical in stewarding a bit of the stakeholder outreach, which is, again, they're going to be, and in fact, you'll hear this a little later. I actually think that using this meeting at times as a way to bring in some of that professional feedback to hear thoughts. I actually think it could be a particular role that we can serve, and I'll talk a little bit about that. That's kind of what's coming next. But then once those goals are set, and call it kind of post-November, then the plan creation piece, which is, okay, now we know where we're going. And now what is the GPS step-by-step directions for how we are going to get there? And when we actually create that plan, there'll be a lot of, I expect there, for example, to be a large part of that plan around data, because some of that data we either don't collect currently or it doesn't exist. I expect there maybe need to be some process changes. I think about, for example, if we're trying to increase certain types, if we're trying to increase the amount of computer science education graduates, for example, if that becomes part of the goal, this transfer question is actually very important, because we have a number of folks who are starting out at Brad Phillips institutions and then are looking to articulate to a Maryland 4-year because they want that degree. Or there may be some folks who realize they don't need to do that at all. And there is a way outside of higher ed that they can do that, or that they can do that within an institution. I just use that as one example. I will say those two parts of the plan are distinct, but also adjacent. I expect as we're creating the goals, Craig Williams is going to be thinking about, or I will ask him to think about, okay, now how do we actually do this? What are some things we would actually want to have institutions do to actually kind of get towards some of these goals? Obviously, Commissioner Tibbs-Stalen, you have thoughts here. Commissioner Serrano, and when he comes back, he has deep thoughts here on the equity side. Commissioner Dukes, obviously, in terms of how a higher ed institution works. So I say all that to say these will be a bit sequential, but not totally, because we're going to be thinking about the how, even as we're coming up with the what. The nice thing is on the how, we have a bit of time, because that is not quite, we don't need to have that done for session. We can have that done, frankly, all the way up until 2026. I would like to do it much before that, so we can have a bit of dialogue with the folks that we need to. But just, again, setting that out as well. Anything else you want to say on number 6, Dr. Dow? Okay. So let me throw this back out to the group. And again, I'm keeping an eye on time here. I think there are some other considerations that we need to put into this plan. And I want to make sure, and again, this is more about the how. I'll name a couple that we want to talk about. One is, I just call it the student perspective, which is for someone who used to be a product manager, I think about, okay, what is the journey of the customer with my product? When I used to work in this space, I did a bunch of secret shopper exercises at community colleges. I pretended to be a community college student. I tried to sign up for a course, and I saw what the process was, and the process was very variable and not always pleasurable. And not just at a community college, at a 4-year, at a career and technical school. But there's a piece of the customer journey for a student that we need to think about, because if you think about who suffers the most there, it's probably folks who've not been to higher ed before, who have known in their families been to higher ed before and don't have the supports to get through it. And that's going to frustrate some of our purposes. I know Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, in terms of, like, for example, choosing a career, the career counselor experience, that is a place where so many students fall through the cracks. How do we make something like that better? Obviously, I think about the research and development experience, just the basic tech transfer process pipeline, variable, to say the least. We kind of want to think about that. That's one. Secondly, one most subsidized career navigation. That is a particular thing. If one of the goals is economic growth, how do we help people figure out what they want to do and figure out the path, the most efficient path to get there? Right now, it's kind of, I call it the Via con Dios approach, go with God. And we hope that you figure it out, when we know that's not good enough, particularly for communities that have been left out and overlooked for a long time. And Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, you said the last one, which is, yeah, we cannot avoid this issue. I can't, I'm not going to be prescriptive about what we want to put in the plan, but it would be hard to justify a plan that does not address this issue and talk about debt and cost and things like that. We know it's on the minds of too many students, too many families. Let me stop here. One, I'm curious, for the commissioners we have, your thoughts on these issues in terms of how these are likely going to be, I ended up less being sections or goals, but more themes that pop up in all of them. But I'm curious, number one, your thoughts on these, also thoughts on just other things that hey, the plan would be remiss if we did not think about X issue that's not here already. And this will not be your last bite at this apple, but I'm just curious from what we have here. And Commissioner Williams, I'm happy to call on you first, since I did I did the call for your other commissioner last time.
Yeah, not much more to add at this point. I think generally the theme of inclusiveness in the vibrancy of all of our institutions on economic impact, economic growth, whether that's as specific as innovation or as a subpoint, is very important. And I'm glad that you referenced that there's an equity piece in the economic development growth and impact goal 3 direction that we're discussing. And I think we need to embark on the right effort in the coming months to really put our arms around how all those institutions contribute to private sector economic impact and the intersection with public sector. And so I just want to make sure we think about that inclusive vibrancy of all those stakeholders on a broader sense of economic impact. And then we can figure out specifically different institutions may play different roles, but there's so much exciting work going on across the entire spectrum of institutions to contribute to growth. And so I appreciate the opportunity to maybe broaden that conversation in goal 3.
Commissioner Tabor-Stalen, I see your comment here. Say a little more about this, and be as expansive as you would like.
Yeah, well, I think in your remarks just before Commissioner Williams, I heard just the importance of this is like the goals are what the strategies and tactics in the plan will hang their hat on. And I hear that in the past, maybe the two have not been as aligned, like plan to goals. And I love a plan that stems from goals, but that makes me think there's even more importance to make sure that the whole pipeline is reflected in the goals, because if it's not, it'll be hard to do so in the plan. So when I think about that, again, it's enrollment, completion, outcomes for completers, costs, and then the impacts on the labor market, which I see as kind of the near-term externality, and then innovation R&D, which is the longer-term externality.
Got it. And I'm not the only guy here. That absolutely makes sense. I think the question will be always the not the path dependency, which is basically, again, the mapping from where we are and we know where we want to go. Usually you can't do it all in year one. What are we going to do in year one to get us there? What are we going to do in year 2 to basically get us another 25% of the way there, so on and so forth. And so I think that's why, again, why we have you all brilliant people on the call, as well as Dr. Dow's team and all these stakeholders who are going to help us map that out. Because I think, to your point, we have the chance to, I think, do something bold, do something big. And give me one quick second. We will be good there. Anything else before we go to kind of what we have coming, kind of coming up? So one of the things you'll see here is that we're going to be, unlike our very orderly MHEC meetings, these are four very busy people. And so this is going to be a little bit of an audible kind of every month, exactly when this meeting is. So again, I thank you for kind of bearing with us as a broader stakeholder community, and also the commissioners themselves. So that's, I think, one. I think secondly, this is an open meeting, and therefore public comment is part of that. We will welcome that. Same way we do it at our MHEC meetings. This is, again, not something we do for ourselves, something we do for the state. So as folks have comments, there'll be means available to do that same way you do for our MHEC meetings, and we do want to hear. Secondly, one thing we want to do is, as we're doing that stakeholder outreach on the goals and on the plan, let's use this forum as a place to do that. Each one of us knows amazing national experts who can come and speak about how we can begin to do that, and let's bring those voices here. And what I also expect going forward is that we're gonna be a little topical. So for example, Commissioner Williams, you talked about a deeper discussion on goal 3 and what that can look like. What I would like to do is have an actual meeting on economic impact of higher education, and let's devote the entire meeting to that. How do we measure it? Who's doing it well? So on and so forth. Bring those experts. Let's hear the feedback, and again, be able to feed that back into the chain. Same thing on goal 1, being meaningful credentials. How do we measure many things that you've mentioned, and then also what are those best practices on the equity side? Same thing. That allows us to kind of go deeper versus being surface level, and also make the most use of this time. And then I think the last piece, which is more broad, and this comes directly also from our chair, how do we learn from what's working? While there are some things we need to create de novo, there's a bunch that we don't. There's a bunch simply that we just haven't picked up on. And while I love Maryland, I think we are the best state in America. We aren't always the best at everything, and there are places that are that we can learn from, and we should do that. And I would say, not just domestically, but also internationally. And so I think we should be really broad about where we look and what we can incorporate. And again, let's use this venue as a place to do that. So as you all see the agendas for meetings going forward, you'll see a lot of that structure, a lot of discussion, a lot of hearing from experts, a lot of hearing from stakeholders. And again, that's all to feed this machine that's going to lead us to our goals in November, as well as lead us to a plan. My hope is in 2025. Commissioner Williams, thank you so much. Dr. Dow, I want to go to you for a second to see if you have anything. And I'm also partially, I don't want to talk, but I do want to make sure that hopefully we can have Commissioner Serrano come back, because I do want to hear his thoughts on goal 2, as I know he had to step out. But Commissioner Dow, Dr. Dow, excuse me, do you have any other additional thoughts that you want to add?
No, yes. Thank you. I think I just want to say on the record, myself, the team that I work with, the agency as a whole, we are here to provide you information and to give you, to feed you in many ways, so that the collective we can figure out our next steps. So please do not hesitate to give me instruction to come back to the next meeting with more information. As Commissioner Agu has alluded to, we are working with a number of to help offline think about these conversations, and we will bring those conversations online to bring everybody into the fold. HPM strategists have a call with Lumina Foundation later this afternoon, in which I am hoping to gain from that the deep metric dive, how they actually include meaningful credentials into their calculations. So that's all to say, please use me and my team as a resource to do some of the legwork in preparation for future meetings and future conversations as this work progresses. I am happy to coordinate that and work with you all.
First of all, thank you so much. I think 2 other things that will be super helpful from your team. One, you all are a part of a number of work groups across the administration around a number of issues. You do a pretty good job of keeping us updated during MHEC. I actually know that there are more things you're involved in than you have time to update us on during MHEC, particularly that are on academic affairs side. Feel free to use this venue as that. So for example, the non-credit credential work that we at Maryland are part of with SHIO, which actually I think bears very much, and Brad Phillips is a great part of that team on behalf of Maryland, keeping this team updated on what we've actually discussed. I think will be really helpful. Just as one example. The other thing is, please tell us who across state government should be part of these discussions. So, for example, I know somewhere there's a cybersecurity work group thinking about workforce somewhere in state government. Folks like that. I know on the allied health side, there are groups thinking about that. Again, these work groups across state government. Please keep us abreast of who in state government is working on these issues, and who we can bring before this group, either formally or informally, to help educate us. And also, my view is if there's a thing that's being done that we don't have to do, that someone else is doing, I'm happy to let them do it. Because again, folks on this call, whether they're commissioners or staff folks, are super busy. So those are two very particular things I think you all also be additionally helpful on. I am looking at the clock, and I do not see Commissioner Serrano. So what we may do, just to make sure that we use people's time correctly, we will probably have as part of our next meeting, Commissioner Serrano just giving his thoughts to really goal 2 around the equity side, and then that'll be part of our full agenda. But I want to thank everyone who was on the call. I want to thank everyone who's going to watch this later. And this is the beginning of the conversation and the work to create the goals and create the plan going forward. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.